Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Talking the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host, coming to you from the BNN Live studios, Eggleston Square, Jamaica Plain, where tonight on the Boston Neighborhood Network, we'll bring you 2 hours of live coverage from today's state primary election. Like you, of course, we're waiting to see who wins in the big races, the primaries for governor, of course, some of the constitutional offices, attorney general, state treasurer, but there's also several local races on the ballot that we're watching closely tonight, and we'll be bringing you all the results from them and analysis, who won and why. And tonight I'm also pleased to have joining us as my co-anchor, my colleague from BNN. She's the host of All About Boston. Seth McCoy joins us tonight on the anchor desk as well. Seth, what can we look forward to from your end?
Well, Joe, we're going to have a fun night talking with politicos here in Boston. Some of my guests, City Councilor Tim McCarthy, Michelle Wu, Representative Aaron Michaelwitz. It's going to be a fun night. This, of course, is the place to come for all of your election coverage. Joe, back to you.
Well, of course, the polls just closed, and it'll be a few minutes before we start to have the early results. But we have some special guests joining us when we come back to give us their perspective on primary election day. Stay tuned. Back with this special edition of Talking the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host tonight. Hours of live coverage from today's state primary election with, well, we're hoping we'll have the final results by sign-off, but of course the governor's race, the race for attorney general, and of course the state treasurer's race sucking up a lot of the oxygen, but also some very interesting local races that we're following. State House, State Senate, and some county races, believe it or not, and we'll have all those results for you as we go along. But with the polls just closing, we're pleased to say we already have our first winner on the set with us. Of course, she is the current state auditor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, elected 4 years ago, running for re-election, but unopposed in this primary. Of course, I'm talking about Suzanne Bump joins us, and Madam Auditor, nice to have you here. Thanks so much for coming in the studio.
Thanks. I'm delighted to be here, and especially under those circumstances,
Well,
unopposed in the primary.
Well, the party's just starting here, obviously.
Right.
And so you've got a great second guest joining us here, a man who never hesitates to share his wit and wisdom, and is a good friend as well.
That's a great intro. I'd like to come on here next week with that one as
I'm
well.
talking, of course, Darnell Williams. He's the Executive Director of the Urban League of Eastern Mass, and thank you both for coming in tonight.
Well, thank you, Joe.
To kick off our coverage. What did you, the 6 o'clock poll showed in the city of Boston, at least, not quite 13% of the voters had turned out to vote. What did you see out there today, and is this a harbinger of something?
Well, the polls were very colorful, I will say. They were well dressed with all of their campaign signs, but frankly, I didn't see a lot of people holding those signs. They were affixed to posts, and I didn't see a lot of people coming and going. You know, there's a polling place right outside my office at the State House, and as of noon, only 167 people had voted, and it wasn't even a trickle. It was just an occasional drop. So the state secretary thinks that Boston will have a higher turnout than they did 4 years ago, but there hasn't been a lot of evidence of that so far.
See, Darnell,
Yeah.
of course, you cut your teeth in the voting rights movement. What did you see today?
Well, as I traveled around and looked at the polls, I have to agree with the auditor. You did not see a whole lot of foot traffic. I did see a couple of elected officials going door to door, knocking on doors, reminding voters that they needed. People did not even remember there was an election today, so that was encouraging to see. But when you looked at the actual polling locations, it was a little sketchy and slow. And so I think the numbers that I heard was like you, it was about 12.8%. And that means that if the numbers are low like that, then it depends who is going to benefit when the numbers are low.
And good question. Of course, primary election relatively early this year, oftentimes or sometimes it's as late as the third week in September, and they say voters don't really focus until after Labor Day. Well, there wasn't much time between Labor Day and today's election. Who does this benefit? Who does it work for? Obviously, it works for you.
Well, I guess that the traditional thinking is that a high turnout benefits challengers, low turnout benefits incumbents. So for the local races, that could give. So for let's see. So Dan Cullinane, right, has a challenger who are some of the
Gloria Fox.
Yeah, Gloria does.
Yeah.
She has two challengers.
Yeah, so conventional wisdom is that they should benefit. What it means, though, for the statewide elections, for governor and lieutenant governor, treasurer, attorney general, I don't know. We've heard that the mayor was really going to be working with organized labor to pull out a vote for Warren Tolman, so that should be getting more people to the polls, but there wasn't really a lot of evidence of that today.
And I think
you get some sense. Look at the
Well,
governor's race in particular. Warren Tolman, one thing, of course, there's some city roots there, and not that his challenger or his opponent doesn't, but in the governor's race.
I think the governor's race is going to come out to, regardless of the turnout, is who can bring the most individuals to pull the lever. And so I think that's really what the key is. I think the polls have been telling a whole different story. It's really going to come down to who's going to get their people out to vote when it's a low turnout. So I think it really comes down to the machine that you have across the state. And I believe that, I know we're talking about the governor's race, but I'll just use the AG's race as an example. If in fact that the Tolman race is utilizing the relationship between the labor unions, that really gives them an advantage when it comes to troops across the Commonwealth, even though that the poll number says that Healy is light years away from that, and so we have to really see how it plans out. But on the governor's race, I think that really when you think about it, is once again, it's getting out the vote. And the low numbers will appeal to those individuals who see either Steve Grossman or Berwick as an option. I know that Martha Coakley's numbers have been significantly higher, but I think Grossman was closing in as we in terms of the last few days. So it's really, but it comes down to how many troops do you have to get the voters out that pulls the lever is going to be the difference. And so
there's some suggestion that voters, at least in Boston, we've had numerous special elections, not just here in Boston, statewide as well, that's suffering some voter fatigue. Yet many people would tell you that the best choices to be made are during primary elections.
Well,
Suzanne, did you see that out there?
in a state with one party that does have much bigger numbers than the other, and we've seen that being the Democratic Party, so that very often does decide the election. The Republicans do have candidates for all of the constitutional offices, but frankly, apart from the governor, lieutenant governor candidates they don't have a very strong field of contenders. And so the Warren Tolman, Maura Healey fight, that could well be it for Attorney General. That could determine who the Attorney General is going to be. Same way for the Treasurer's race.
the only thing that I would add, Joe, and audit is simply this, is that we don't know what the swing card in terms of the independent voters. They will really be the deciding factor in this particular race.
They're the majority of the voters. Which ballot they take,
56%.
although I think it's fair to say there's not many choices on the Republican side. There is a Republican primary, and no one should think
You know what, though? I don't expect, of course, we won't know until the numbers are in, but I don't expect that there are going to be very many unenrolled voters who went out today. If the candidates were having a hard enough time getting Democrats out to vote in the Democratic primary, I just don't see a lot of independent voters going out and pulling either a Republican or a Democratic
So this may be truly determined by party activists.
Yeah.
And Darnell, let me bring you in on this because, of course, this is the first time in 8 years that we haven't had a major candidate of color on the ballot. And I'm wondering in the community of color, if you think that has taken away from, an emphasis or a willingness to vote.
Well, no, I don't necessarily think it takes away. I think it adds the excitement. They see someone who's running for office that looks like them, that they feel maybe has a empathy in terms of their background. But I think the way that we would want to translate that is that now you have to look at candidates and say, who do they have surrounding them that I can have access to, that I know that they're going to be sensitive to the issues that are impacting. So it's
to be a little more discerning.
That's right. I mean, it's great to have a person of color, but if you don't have that, you got to make sure that you're not standing by watching the parade go by and say, well, because we don't have a person of color, I'm not going to be engaged in the game. I think the process says that we need to make sure you understand their record, where do they stand on these issues, and then who do they surround themselves with, and then how do we gain access to that person, regardless of what he or she is advocating in terms of their platform.
Well, and let me come back to you, of course, Charlie Baker specifically, and we had a couple of Republicans here who were leading his campaign to reach out to more people of color in the community, and I'm wondering, could we see, I know traditionally it's been a Democratic base here in the city, but could we see some people making different choices this time?
I think you will. I think that folks, it depends on how the numbers shake out today. That will determine where many of the Democrats, politics is about relationships. It's really, how do I feel like I'm sitting next to the auditor, but outside of a studio, I have a great relationship, there's good chemistry, good history, great dialogue in terms of the issues confronting the Commonwealth. When you don't have that, you got a lot of work to get my attention. And I think that's where most voters are, and they want to make sure that there is some type of chemistry connection, that I can feel that you are, you have other than blood in your veins. There's got to be something that I can.
We hope. Wait a minute.
I think that Darnell is making a good point. And the fact of the matter is that the Republicans have not historically in Massachusetts offered a lot to communities of color. And when you look at the national agenda and the anti-immigration and the disregard for issues of income inequality, and creating opportunities to move up through career paths and achieve the American dream. You don't see that from them, and so I think that they've got a real hurdle, even here in Massachusetts, where our Republicans are a little bit more moderate than they are nationally, but they just haven't. What can Charlie Baker point to? Mitt Romney? I mean, Mitt Romney. What kind of relationship did he have?
I don't think he wants to look in the rearview mirror on that one.
He's exactly right.
But I think with Charlie, but I have to give credit to Charlie. Charlie has surrounded himself with folks that I think that he learned some valuable lessons from 2010. And I believe that they really have made a concerted effort to reach out to community of colors across the state. So it's really, I mean, I think he's learned some critical political lessons in terms of, and I would just probably put him in a different category in the sense than the National Party, in my humble opinion.
No, I
indeed,
agree
there's
with
some
that.
history there, other than the last 8 years of
That's right.
Deval Patrick. We've seen a succession of Republican governors.
Right. 16 years of Republican governors.
So we could see more. Suzanne, Madam Auditor, of course, you're on the ballot this year. Unopposed, you will have a Republican.
That must be a good feeling,
in the
eh?
fall.
It was heavenly. It was heavenly. But that meant that I had to rest up a lot, and so now I've got to get
now
really.
You're
yeah,
ready.
now I'm engaged.
But of course, looking at this field, and I think some people would, some pundits would say the Democratic field is weak. When you look at the poll numbers showing the Republican, only 11% of the state registered Republicans, even or perhaps winning a future gubernatorial race, give you some second thoughts. You were mentioned as a gubernatorial candidate early on, giving you some second thoughts. You wish perhaps that you had jumped into this race instead of running for re-election?
That was speculation that I did nothing to encourage.
I think I helped to fuel that too.
You might well have. No, that is not speculation that I encouraged, and I really did not seriously think about it. It's flattering when someone says, you're doing such a good job at what you're doing, you really ought to think about moving up the ladder. But I am more than happy with the opportunity that I have to impact government, to be objective and independent in my analysis of government, and as a Democrat, to say, look, Democrats want to be good stewards. We believe that government gets stronger, not weaker, when we recognize some challenges and some problems, and then we fix them. So I have no regrets. And I appreciate what you said about the quality of the field. I think we do have strong candidates on the Democratic side. The problem is that Deval,
Do they all pull back together after this primary?
I think they will. But let's be honest. I mean, they don't have Deval Patrick's eloquence and charisma, his ability to relate.
Move a room. Galvanize.
Deval had a unique set of qualities. I can't even remember anybody who before him possessed those qualities.
Yeah, I think we'd have to go
Just
back.
some people I know that haven't run.
Yeah, that's right. But really,
My wife was very clear. She took the checkbook away from me and told me to stay focused in on doing civil rights work.
Well, hey, and you do a great job of that. Listen, I want to thank you both for coming in tonight and kind of setting the table, so to speak. We've got lots of interviews, lots of other guests coming up and joining us, but it was very special of you both to join us. State Auditor Suzanne Bump.
thank you.
Always a
Executive Director
pleasure.
Darnell Williams from the Urban League. Thank you both for joining us. I'm going to toss it now over to my colleague on the other anchor desk, Seth McCoy. Joins us. Seth, who have you got tonight? And take it away.
Joe, right now we have City Councilors Michelle Wu and Tim McCarthy. We're going to talk. Obviously, it's a little too soon to talk about any of the results coming in, but a couple of things I just wanted to pick up on what Joe was talking about with Auditor Bump and Darnell Williams is that obviously Auditor Bump, like you, run for office, you know what it's like to go out there, pound the pavement, ask for every vote. Darnell talked about how low the voter turnout is. Now, as elected officials, how do you respond to that when it must be a little frustrating? Tonight at 6 o'clock, there were only 47,000 voters in Boston who have voted. How do you look at that and say this is really encouraging, or do you? Michelle?
It's very tough on election day
Always
because
is
at
fun,
that point there's so little that you can do. You can try to reach out to the voters you've already contacted and get people out on the doors, but really it's all the months leading up to this. And with the statewide election, so many people on the ballot, so many candidates, not enough resources to go around and send mailings and be on TV for a long period of time. I found that a lot of voters were still confused about who was running for which office, when the election was taking place. So there was a lot of voter education happening on the street today, which I think contributes to that lack of turnout.
Doesn't that frustrate you, Tim, that so many people can sit back and say, I had no idea there was an election today? Certainly it's been in the papers, maybe not wall-to-wall coverage that we'd like to see. It's been on the TV. So to have people respond that they didn't even know today was an election day, what do you think?
It's incredibly frustrating. You know, we consistently talk about our rights, you know, rights of free speech and battling, you know, Market Basket was on every single night talking about workers' rights. And yet one of our most important rights is voting, and we just don't seem to focus on it. And it's very disheartening. Knocking on doors all last summer. Thank God we didn't have to do it this summer. Knocking on doors last summer. It's very frustrating when they open the door and, you know, who are you? No, I don't vote.
Right.
How can you have an investment of a home, of a family, of children in a school, and you're not voting for the legislative body that takes care of that budget?
Right.
Incredibly frustrating. And then you also think about all of the men and women who fought for the country to have that right, and it's really, it's disheartening.
Well, and you also find that people who might not vote in local elections are actually voting for federal offices. They'll vote for president, they'll vote for United States senator, but they don't focus in on the local, which is, again, like you were saying, that's the bread and butter, essentially, of how you live. You pay taxes in the city, you go to work possibly in the city, you might have to go to the outskirts of Boston, but it is frustrating to not have that sense of we must get out and we must go vote. So hopefully the numbers will increase between 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock. I'm not so sure. Do you think, Michelle, that maybe we should start looking at whether or not to have Saturday elections?
Absolutely. I think we should explore all the options. I agree with the previous panel that the timing of this year, the special seems especially early. And my sister went back to school just this last week, so we were a mad scramble of getting ready with school supplies and clothes, and with so many families just checking back in, and then all of a sudden having to run to make primary election decisions. I think it was a lot all at once. So, there's a lot of things, early registration, having voting happen over a longer period of time, other requirements that are very successful in other countries, but we need to be pulling those numbers up.
Yeah, maybe a week full of voting, Tuesday through Saturday, people can go to the polls and get it done.
That's a long day to stand at the polls.
For you guys, you might not like it, but for voters, they might appreciate having extra opportunity. Maybe, yes, not Tuesday through Saturday, but maybe do it on a Tuesday and do it on a Saturday. That's all I'm saying. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple of the races that Joe and his panel did not touch on. One is the Register of Probate. So this, of course, is such an interesting race to watch, namely because the current office holder, Patty Campitelli, has made it very interesting. So Tim's looking at me like, yes, she has.
That's yes, very descriptive.
So, yes, indeed. So we have some other people in the race. Felix Arroyo, who was the former city councilor. His son then became a city councilor, now is the chief of Health and Human Services for Mayor Walsh. Marty Keough, who worked for Peggy Davis Mullen, also on the ballot. John Sepulveda from East Boston. I know I'm forgetting somebody else on the ballot, but what are your predictions, Michelle, for that race?
There were so many candidates for a race that rarely gets any attention. So I think many voters were confused, and it will come down to name recognition. Felix Arroyo, for example, had the endorsement of Mayor Walsh, and I know the mayor's machine is out big today for Felix and for Warren Tolman and some others. So I think that will be a huge boost. I have seen a lot of the other candidates out and about as well, so they've all been working hard. And maybe the silver lining is that because the office has been in the news more, people will pay more attention to it in the future from here on out.
Right. Tim, do you think people will re-elect Patty? This has been some internet discussion.
No, I don't think so. I think Michelle, really summed it up. I think that because Marty Walsh backed Felix, that is a huge boost. They're going with a two-message, Warren Tolman and Felix. I know in my own district and going throughout the city, every time I turn around, Marty Keough, he seems to be standing behind me.
Right.
He's everywhere. I wouldn't be completely shocked if his numbers were very impressive.
Right, he's from West Roxbury.
From West Roxbury, grew up in Hyde Park, had a really good, strong campaign at large, and I don't think, no matter who you're rooting for, you can't say that you outworked him, because it would be impossible. He worked extremely hard to get his name out there. So again, we'll see what happens.
I know. I have to say that whoever wins should really talk to John Sepulveda if he's not the winner, because he did have a lot of good ideas, and I think he would be an added bonus to that office. And that's the other thing. A lot of people don't even know what that office does. No. If Tim, somebody came up to you and said, "What does that office do?" What would you?
I would say I have no idea. No.
One thing, I had the chance to talk with John Sepulveda, and he mentioned that he put together a website for the office, not just kind of laying out what it does, but collating all of the materials, the PDFs that lie in all different places for how to adopt a child, how to file for divorce, and things like that. So I think a lot of ideas came out of this race, just as they did in our race last November. So hopefully going forward, that'll be a good thing for whoever is victorious.
In all seriousness, it is a very helpful, it's a serious function.
I will point out that you actually do know what the office is.
I do know
you were joking. So
but,
people at home, he does know.
Yeah, I just don't want anybody to get in trouble. It has serious repercussions if they're not serving the public properly.
Absolutely.
But it's one of those, it's another one very similar to the Governors Council. Bart Timothy's running the Governors Council, he's a Hyde Park guy. There's a couple of people who are Jubenville's out there, and again, I know that
that's a rematch too, Jubenville versus Timothy.
Right. So. And a lot of people say, "What's that all about?" And I know some candidates are talking about eliminating the Governors Council, so that debate comes in.
Right.
But again, the debate seems to be around the same people. The politicos who want to be involved, the people who are on the outside don't pay much attention to it, and that is a frustrating part.
Yeah. What do you think about the terms for office? I believe the Register of Probate is a 6-year term. Should that be a 6-year term, or should it be a 4-year, maybe even a 2-year?
When I worked for a public works department, they used to lend out people to help out the election department, because simply the election department, if you kept it at the size it needs to be to actually run an election, there's a lot of wasted time.
Right.
I'm a firm believer that we should start really looking at the city charter itself, to start lining up city councils with mayoral runs. I think it's a big price tag. And I also feel that as an elected official now, it's September. I'm already starting to think about what I need to do to take the next step.
Right.
What happens if I have an opponent? What happens when I do what? And you start getting to that campaign mode, and I feel like I'm just hitting, we hit the ground running because I've been involved in it for so long,
Yeah.
but still, I'm really just getting used to working with my new partners in the council and discussing things, and there is a learning curve, no matter how much you know about it.
Right.
And you worked in the city council for years, there's that learning curve, and once you start to get that curve, you find like, okay, now I got to stop doing my job to try to run for re-election again, and that's insane to me, and just the pure cost of it.
Yeah.
I know in my race in District 5, Andrew Casino was one of my opponents. Great young man, had some great ideas, and that was one of his main things about how much money we spend every 2 years on the city
Right.
council race.
Absolutely. I know, Michelle, that you agree. Let's talk about another race, and that is the sheriff's race for Suffolk County Sheriff. Steve Tompkins was appointed to that position. This is the first time he's actually running for that office. You also have Doug Bennett, who's running, and there's a third person who I'm blanking on.
Goodwin.
Goodwin. So are we going to see any upsets there? Is Doug Bennett finally going to get into elective office?
I may be a little biased here because I'm a big supporter of Sheriff Tompkins, but I think he's been doing a great job, and throughout his term so far has been really out in the community. I will say that the Sheriff Bennett signs have quite a lot of visibility.
Are those signs misleading, though, Tim?
They're hand painted. I will say that.
It's creative.
Yeah. It's funny. Misleading's tough, but yeah, they do seem to make people believe that he is actually the sheriff now. Yeah, they're hand painted. And they're everywhere,
Nice.
and they're on doors, and they're on recycles. I literally,
But
one of the signs at the polls today was painted on a Elizabeth Warren sign, painted
Yep.
over an Elizabeth Warren sign.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
You got to give him some props, though, for creativity, because I'm sure he's saving himself a ton of money. As you both know, signage is expensive.
Right.
So to be able to go out and get recycled signs from somebody else, or wood, that's fine, painting it. But yeah, I mean, some people have said that the way he presented himself on those signs is a little misleading. So
Yeah.
I think we have to have faith in the voters that most people will check it and do the research and know what's going on and look into who they're casting their vote for.
absolutely. Now, I know both of you have been supporting Warren Tolman for Attorney General.
Yes.
It's going to be a tight race. I know that you both obviously went into today thinking, yes, Warren's going to run away with this, or maybe not, maybe it'll just be close. But do you still feel that same way? Do you think that Warren Tolman's going to be the winner at the end of the day?
There was a lot of great energy. I was with Warren at Cathedral High School, which has 4 polling locations, or four precincts in the South End. And his message was he was meeting a lot of voters and catching a lot of people who were frankly undecided when they came in. So I think he's been out and working hard. I think the mayor's endorsement, Governor Patrick's endorsement, both coming in the sort of crucial minutes of the campaign will make a difference too.
And David was just talking in my ear. I guess we have some results, some preliminary results for that race. David, can we put those up on the screen? Oh, to my left here. So right now, actually, Maura Healey's got 69% of the vote. Warren Tolman has 31%. And that, of course, is statewide. So we've got a long way to go. It's obviously only about 8:30. But are you surprised, Tim, by that number?
This was a strange race in the fact that a lot of people that I talked to and close friends are with Healey, and I'm happen to be with Tolman. But there wasn't any animosity in the race. What I got a lot of is, they're really both really good candidates, and I like them both. But I know Maura from blah blah blah. I played basketball with Maura, or I worked in the Senate with Warren. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
There wasn't that. It really wasn't any animosity. It was kind of like, I hope we all do well,
And that's been, I think, the best thing about this race is that both candidates are well qualified. They're both great people. So there is none of that, back and forth, sniping at each other. Michelle, were you surprised at, I'm sure you heard the same stuff when you're out in the community. Is that what you're hearing? Are you surprised by how, everybody's just May the best person win?
Yeah, I think that race from early on has captivated most people, maybe more than any other race. And I remember after the Democratic State Convention, people said they were blown away by those two speeches. Those really stuck out. So I think, that's been the one to watch, and it's great when we have great choices on the ballot.
What does that say, though, for the governor's race when the most exciting race is the attorney general race? Tim?
I think as a Democrat, the Democratic Party, it's tough right now. I think that President Obama's approval or disapproval rating being so high right now is really turned people off. And the higher offices, people just have fed up with everything. And I think that's a lot of, you talk to a lot of good Democrats who always vote Democrat, and they're just kind of rubbing their heads like, oh. And that's really too bad. And I think that's why the Healy-Tolman race was so interesting, because those are two candidates that they debated the issues, and they really they came out of that being both really solid candidates. Where there was some struggles in the other debates and not really clear winners. I didn't feel maybe some of the debates even Berwick.
Don
sounded
Berwick
better.
did great, yeah.
Yeah, and we had stated off stage. I think John Nucci wrote the article regarding what you can write under your name, and
Right.
we talked about it a little bit at the polls with some of the poll workers. You've got Attorney General, you've got Commonwealth Treasurer, Massachusetts, and then you have 103 Pond Street or whatever he lives.
Right.
Where I think if you put Harvard surgeon, people might say, "Wow, you know what? I didn't know much about him, but now that I'm here,
I'll vote for him."
Yeah.
Quickly, Michelle, your picks tonight for governor, lieutenant governor, and treasurer.
If I had to predict, I would say Martha Coakley. It seems like the poll numbers have been going that direction, and the margin's been high there. Lieutenant governor, I don't know. I think that one could be a close one too, and I think many people are undecided. I'm not sure with that one. I think Warren will pull it off for Attorney General. And Treasurer Deb Goldberg, I've been supporting her, and I think there's great energy there too.
Tim, do you have any difference of opinion?
I think Kerrigan's going to win the lieutenant governor, and I think the rest of the picks are pretty solid.
All right, well, I want to thank you both for being here tonight. You're always great guests to have.
Thanks,
And I'm going to throw it back to Joe.
Thank you.
Joe, who do you have on the show right now?
All right, Seth, the numbers, of course, continue to tumble in. Early numbers at this point, but perhaps some trends showing tonight as we continue our coverage of election 2014. We'll continue to update you throughout the evening, but at this point, perhaps too early to tell. Again, some early results, but not clear of what they portend. But I am very pleased to have joining me in this segment a couple of very special guests. First, from the 2nd Suffolk District, she's the state committee woman for the GOP there, an old friend and a former guest as well. Rachel Kemp joins us. Rachel, nice to have you here.
Thank you so much.
And also joining me on the set live, City Councilor at Large, Michael Flaherty.
Thank you, Joe.
South Boston.
Great to be back,
nice
Joe.
have you both here. Well, Rachel, I got to start with you. Of course, most of the contested races tonight, and certainly local races, but statewide races involve Democrats. But of course, there is a big GOP primary. Charlie Baker running against Mark Fisher. That's the race that most are watching. The last time you were here on the set, we talked about your efforts to attract more people to the GOP banner here, especially in the city of Boston, especially people of color.
Exactly.
And just give us a quick update. How'd you do on that? How's that going?
Well, that is actually going very well. We've had the Vietnamese community becoming more visible and more active, and they are such a backbone in the Dorchester area, and we have a candidate. And we were told that it couldn't be done, that we couldn't get a candidate on the ballot, and we have one running for state rep seat.
5th Suffolk?
5th Suffolk, absolutely, and she's doing a fabulous job.
Well, again, of course, all eyes on the primaries, including the GOP primary. What did you see out there today? Of course, Charlie Baker, the heavy favorite in the primary, at least if you're watching the polls. What did you see? What did you talk from talking to your colleagues?
Well, there were really no surprises. You know, we all expected Charlie to come in to really take this election and put his moniker on it. He and Karen Polito have been working really diligently as a team across the state, taking the message to the people. You know, there's the economic message, there's the education message, there's the labor message, there's the I've been there message, and they really are a team that complement each other, and it's working.
Well, of course, there's depending upon the candidate, we've certainly wouldn't be the first time Republicans have gained some traction in the city of Boston. Not that we're looking solely about that, but certainly. And I'm thinking when Scott Brown won the special election for Ted Kennedy's seat, how well he did in South Boston. And of course, there's been a lot of changes across the city, and South Boston included. But could we, Michael Flaherty, could we see something like that? Does Charlie Baker, does he gain some traction in more working class neighborhoods?
Very possible. And to probably music to your ears, I bounced around the city today. I went to a number of different polling locations, and as people were leaving the polls, I overheard many people saying that they were going to be voting Republican in the final election, which they were there today, obviously voting as Democrats. They may have had a favorite, whether it was a local state representative or a local state senator or a county position. But I heard it from union men and women. I heard it from community activists coming out of polling locations, people that I know, people that you know across the city that were basically saying, hey, you know, people, as they were thanking them for voting, people were saying, thank you for voting. And they were like, yep, no problem, but we're going to be voting Republican in November. So I thought that was very interesting because I heard it across the city in a number of polling locations.
Unheard of, and in other parts of the state as well. What do you attribute that to?
I mean, there was a lot of voter apathy today as well. I picked up on a little bit of that. If you think about the last uncontested gubernatorial race that was in 2006, turnout in Boston was a little over 90,000. I think we're going to probably hit around 60,000, maybe just a little over. Significant drop-off, Joe.
In a contested.
No doubt about it. And that speaks a lot to the fact, I think particularly in Boston, there was no real transformative candidate of color at the top of the ballot. First candidate of color I believe that you came across was our sheriff, Sheriff Steve Compkins. Obviously, Felix Arroyo, my former colleague, was running for Registrar Beat along with Leland Chung, I believe, was a candidate at the lieutenant governor spot. But that may speak to the fact that whole pockets of our city didn't come out in the numbers that they've come out in the past. So whether that there's an opportunity there for the Republican Party to tap into that and to engage the community, that would be something that we're going to see over the next several weeks. But I think in general, any Democratic candidate that has an opponent in November ought to be aware that there is an undercurrent out there that people they were voting today maybe because they had a favorite state representative or a favorite state senator or someone that was running for a county seat that they knew or that they worked with. But I heard it many times across the city that people were saying that they were going to be polling Republican in the final.
Well, Rachel, I want to throw it back to you. As you look at the Democratic field, then, are you polling for any one of those candidates? Do you think any of them would be easier for Charlie Baker to beat? That's assuming he wins the primary, which I think most people feel he will.
Well, yes, let's say that Charlie will win the preliminaries here. We're thinking that Charlie is such a strong candidate, particularly with Karen Polito, that he can beat whomever. We're assuming...
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. We're making the assumption that it will be Coakley. We think that we still have a winner here. And to the councilman's point, there really hasn't been a galvanizing issue during the primaries. That will be different in the general election. We have the gas tax vote. And that has been an initiative that has made headway across the state, and it's resonated with people regardless of their political persuasion. So once the gas tax is back out there and it's visible again and the lawn signs are out and they're understanding the difference that it will make and that the Republicans are the people who brought that to the table, it will strengthen
Well,
the vote.
one of the issues that drive up the turnout, in
Correct.
your opinion. And what about what the council referred to? Of course, this is the first year in 8 years where we have not seen a significant candidate of color on the ballot. Does that make your job easier in terms of selling Charlie Baker?
I don't know if it makes my job easier because Charlie has had to recognize that the city of Boston and its demographics are something that he's going to have to rely upon. So he's been already meeting with the ministers. He's been meeting with all of the, let's call them, the points of influence in the city, making sure that they understand who he is and the message that he is bringing and what he can do and cannot do once he becomes governor.
Well, and Michael, back to you. Of course, Charlie Baker ran 4 years ago, and some would say his campaign was poorly conducted, but part of it was that he was too critical. And this year, are we seeing a kinder, gentler Charlie Baker, and does that appeal more to Democrats in general?
I think so.
Or is
Well,
it something
I can say
else?
that 4 years ago he didn't spend as much time in the city of Boston.
Correct.
I can tell you that I've participated in every parade, and unlike previous Republican candidates that don't necessarily come into the parades, to the block parties, to the Little League openings, and to the football Pop Warner jamborees, I can actually tell you that Charlie Baker has been doing all of that. So he is definitely spending more time in Boston. He's definitely
Looked like he was
participating.
actually enjoying himself.
Yeah.
Of course, you know.
Well, Dorchester Day Parade, Charlie really likes that one.
I don't think
Who
he
could
missed,
not
yeah,
enjoy
yeah.
that?
And I don't think he missed a Little League opening. So to that point, I think he learned a valuable lesson. He's definitely spending more time in Boston. He's not as critical. I know he was very critical of labor the last time around. I'm not hearing that this time around, which is to his benefit. I talked to a lot of men and women from the unions today who were also talking favorably about supporting.
Well, let's
so
go back
it's
to the
very interesting.
Democrats. Which of those Democratic candidates, and of course, yes, the polls showed Coakley with a sizable
Right.
lead, but we haven't seen the final.
Sure.
Which one of those? Which of those do you think would have the most pull here in the city of Boston? Might be the strongest candidate running this
I mean, it's a great question. As of right now, so half of the precincts have been counted in Boston, so Coakley is ahead with 44% over Steve Grossman at 33%. Maura Healey is also ahead right now by about 8 to 9 percentage points, and Kerrigan is ahead on the lieutenant governor spot by about 10 percentage points. So again, that's only half of the precincts counted. So you're sort of starting to see how that's falling in Boston. I'm not quite sure. You could probably speak better from the Republican side as to who you guys would prefer to have as the candidate.
She said
but-
she doesn't care.
Well, I
but,
did say that. I
yeah.
did say that.
Yeah,
But
but you
we're
could-
expecting that it's going to be Martha Coakley,
Right.
and we've been preparing for that. That's why the victory offices have been doing their work. We're out door knocking in the same manner that the Democrats are. We have better data. We have predictive data that will help us. And I think it's going to be just a better boots on the ground effort
be.
than we've ever had before.
Right.
And
And-
that's going to make a significant difference.
And to that point, if whoever that candidate is, I think the number that you're watching for this evening is whether or not the Democratic nominee can get to 50%, or preferably over 50%. The closer they are to sort of that 40% will really speak to what I was witnessing and listening to today, Joe, as I bounced around the various polls across the city, and I was hearing it loudly. People were very vocal about it, and it crossed all demographics in our city, which will bode well for someone like Charlie Baker.
No, and of course, traditionally, the power broker in the city of Boston has been the mayor of the city, and of course, Democrats continue to court our new mayor, Marty Walsh. But does he have the same kind of machine, the same kind of pull that Mayor Menino used to have in these races? Although he had a spotty track record, I think it'd be fair to say, in some of the candidates he picked, nonetheless. In terms of driving out the turnout, are we likely to see a full court press from Mayor Marty Walsh?
Well, that's interesting. Obviously, it's the power of the office. Clearly, it's the 18,000 plus city employees. But if you think about before Marty became the mayor, in terms of how how experienced he was in terms of campaigning, how he was able to get that vote out, and then we saw it in his own election. So whether he decides to sort of hit the gas, if you will, put that foot on the pedal, remains to be seen. He may do it for certain positions and may not do it for others. But and I can also say that he's a breath of fresh air in the city. He has his hands full getting to know city government. So it's important for him to keep two hands on the wheel, given that this is just he's in his first year. So it'll be interesting to see how much he wants to weigh in and how much he intends to weigh in. So that'll be
Rachel, something your party fears, so to speak?
Well, we're still looking at those independent voters, because that's the block of voters that are still undecided. And regardless of which party you're in, if you win with a large margin, it's assumed that you're tapping that voter base. And that's what everyone wants. So we want to really read the minds of the independent voter and to have them to cross over and vote and feel comfortable voting Republican.
Of course, the final verdict delivered statewide, and in independent unenrolled voters over 50% of the total vote. So a bit of a warm up here today, but at least at this point, again, showing Charlie Baker the all but certain Republican nominee, and perhaps Martha Coakley if the numbers we have of the Democratic nominee, some other interesting races on the ballot, farther down ballot, and perhaps the 5th Suffolk House race. We've got Republican running. Not too many others, but take it one step at a time.
One step at a time, because as you know, the down ticket really supports the up ticket. And the more Republicans that we're able to get at the lower level will ensure success. And that's what we're looking to build, that infrastructure to make that happen.
And I will say, if I can just add, someone that's run in nonpartisan races, that for you to not take the Democratic vote, or at least your candidates to take the Democratic vote for granted, for the simple reason is that despite the fact that they have the Democratic label behind them while you're courting independence, what I've learned, particularly in Boston, is that people vote the person, not the party. In many instances, people are Democrats because their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents were Democrat. But at the end of the day, that independent voter is also alive and well in a Democratic voter.
Exactly.
And so my advice to your party would be to continue to do that outreach and to continue to
and that's exactly what we're
work
doing.
both sides of the aisle.
Well, and again, I want to thank Rachel Kemp from the 2nd Suffolk State Committee woman for the GOP there. Rachel. Seth McCoy comes back with a couple more very special guests. Stay tuned for more of our election 2014 coverage.
And welcome back to the special election night coverage. It's obviously preliminary evening here in Boston, but also statewide. And joining me now, Representative Erin Michaelwitz and Samantha Washburn-Baronie, who's the executive director at the Mass Women's Political Caucus. Now, Joe had some guests on earlier talking about how there's a lack of folks of color, if you will, in the statewide races. However, what there is not lacking, women. So, Samantha, for you, this must be a very exciting moment at Mass Women's Political Caucus because there are so many women in high-profile offices.
Absolutely, and I think we say year and year again that it's the year of the woman, and for MWPC it's been the year of the woman since 1971, but I think that this year especially is exciting. It's almost down the ballot, ballots full of women, which is really thrilling, and I think that regardless of what happens tonight, we'll have a great slate and more women holding office in Massachusetts.
Well, it's looking, Erin, like we are going to have women at the top of the ticket. Governor's office right now, it looks like Martha Coakley is going to pull that out. For Attorney General, it looks like Maura Healey. For Treasurer, Deb Goldberg. Obviously, Suzanne Bump, the State Auditor, has no Democratic opposition, so she's going to be on the ballot. What are your thoughts on this, Erin?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, it's not just that they're female candidates. It's that they're really strong candidates.
I'm glad you said that.
The people that look like they're doing well tonight. Obviously the Attorney General Martha Coakley was a favorite going into this race. Maura Healey has been someone who voters have gotten to know and I think have really liked, and especially Democratic voters obviously have gotten to know and really like. And Deb Goldberg has also been someone who has been within the party atmosphere for quite some time, and so she's not new or her story is not necessarily new to a lot of Democratic voters. But there are strong candidates up and down the board, and I think it's an exciting time for women candidates across the state, and it's trickling down into the state rep, state Senate seats as well.
Absolutely, you probably see a lot of candidates coming through, or people who are potentially going to run. Are you encouraged by the amount of women and other folks who are now stepping up to the plate and saying, I want to run for office? Yeah,
we, especially in like the House, we have a sway that is heavy favored in terms of the male demographic, and so I think it is nice to see a nice balance take place, and it will help in terms of further leadership positions, and as you go trickle up the ladder of the House.
And Samantha, that's something that you see in your role, is the hesitance of women to actually step into the political arena. Have you seen in recent years that is now, you're turning the tide and you're going to have women who are out there trying to get elected?
Absolutely. I mean, it's fairly interesting because you look at the statistics. There have been 182 women who have served in the Massachusetts state legislature compared to over 200,000 men. And that statistic is really staggering. I used to work in the House, and there are so many great allies on women's issues and on working families issues, like Representative Miklowitz. But I think that we're really encouraged by the fact that there were a lot of open seats this year. Over 90 women ran for office across the state, and we're also seeing this trend where women are clustering to seats where other women have won before, which is really exciting. So I think we're going to have a lot of wins on the down ticket races, and hopefully we'll see a little bit of a change come January swearing in.
It's going to be very exciting. Aaron, we were talking earlier with City Councilors Wu and McCarthy about the low voter turnout. You tweeted, however, earlier that your precincts, 3 of them, 4 of them were the highest. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I mean, I think I have large precincts because we don't re-precinct in the city of Boston, and the population in the downtown neighborhoods has really the population of the city has shifted downtown tremendously over the last couple decades. So you do see a higher, individual precincts be higher in terms of some of my districts. So I like to brag a little bit about it. But it is, the downtown neighborhoods have been very active over the last couple of years. I mean, they were very active last year in the mayor's race. They've been very active in years past, and I think that they're people that need to be paid attention to, and they are being paid attention to by.
Why do you think
candidates.
They're being so active?
I think because you have some of those areas like really like the financial district or real downtown that are now building communities, and you have some other areas like Bay Village, like the South End, that weren't necessarily politically active in years past or in generations past that are now really trying to mobilize together and are voices that a lot of elected officials like myself have to listen to.
So can you duplicate those efforts in your area?
I try.
And put them across the whole city? Because of course, Samantha, that's something that is discouraging when you look at how many people have actually gone out to vote today. Here in the city of Boston, it's been dismal. I'm sure that's the way it is across the state. You probably have an idea of what those numbers are. I know you obviously go out there and try to encourage people to vote, not just women, but households, which include men.
Of course.
So what are you seeing when you're going out there knocking doors for different candidates? What is the response you're getting?
Well, I will say that it has been really positive this year. I've been out in Worcester, I've been out in other parts of Massachusetts, and then I spent most of my day today in Boston talking to voters on the phone, on the doors, at the polls, and it's funny because usually I don't have enough opportunity to say that I'm with the Women's Political Caucus, but people are so excited that there are so many women on the ballot. And that being said, I think there are a lot of other factors that drive people to the polls and motivate people to the polls. I live in Charlestown. We had a really exciting special election this year, and I think that that momentum really pulls people out. And with so many open seats, I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
Do you think, though, Aaron, that sometimes the special elections make people just want to sit home and not go out and vote?
I think people want to go out and vote. It's just a matter of sometimes they need to know what it is, what they're voting for, and who they're voting for. And sometimes it's challenging for candidates to get across them, especially in this day and age where people are very centered on their they're wearing their headphones on their iPhones. They're not necessarily wanting to pay attention, or but I think they once you get to them, they do want to be engaged.
Right, and that's the astonishing part to me. We were talking earlier on the panel earlier about how people today were like, it's an election. I didn't realize.
Right.
there are signs out there. If you read the paper, even if you just happen to casually walk by somebody reading a paper, you would have to know that it's an election day. So how do we turn this voter apathy into actually more people going out in November?
Well, I think it's getting people to be invested in their community first and foremost. I mean, and that's what we try to do in some of the the downtown neighborhoods in terms of people that are very transient, trying to get them to want to stay there and want to raise their kids there, and in turn then become invested and then feel they need to get out there and make their voice heard. Sometimes that's dealing with younger students or young professionals that might not necessarily want to raise a family there, but you want to try to get them to be more invested in the community. That can be a challenge, but that right there is where you cross over into an important threshold of voter turnout and voter apathy,
Right.
whichever one you
And
look at.
I think that's an important point to make, is that sometimes people come here and they're working here and they're living here. They might have started off going to school here, but they don't see themselves living here long term.
Right.
However, before you know it, 5 years has gone by, 10 years has gone by, and then at that point, Samantha, do you think that you can still grab them and get them invested in the community? Joining a ward committee, for example?
Absolutely, and I think a lot of it has to do with what issues are motivating voters to the polls. I think this year, for instance, we saw so much in the beginning of the summer around the Supreme Court decisions of the buffer zone and with Hobby Lobby, and I think that people really, especially young professionals, they realize that policy, they have a stake in the policy, and if candidates and elected officials can really deliver that message to voters, then I think that's one way that we can really drive voters to the polls.
And that it's not just about the federal elections, it's about the local elections.
Exactly.
I mean, obviously, being a local elected official, it can be challenging to try to get people interested in what a state rep does, but it is very valuable, and because we are the most localized, the most day in and day out, most important to your daily individual life.
I mean, you're writing legislation that can impact people, and
like city councilors are dealing with the potholes and the street lamps, and
but you do some of that.
We
though,
do, of
too,
course, we do
you
it
know?
all. We do it all at the State House.
Right, and I can speak to that. I think constituent services, I did it for a number of years for a legislator, and that's so important to voters, and I think that really echoing that and harnessing voters that way is another way that we can really get over this hump of apathy that we're seeing.
And mentoring other people to actually run for office, whether they're women or people that Aaron might see out in the community and can look to them and say, yeah, down the line, this person would be a really good representative for this neighborhood, whether it's on the city council or at the State House. So thank you both for being here tonight. It's an exciting night for everybody.
Thank you, Seth.
And we're going to turn it back to Joe. Joe?
Thank you, Seth, to you and your guests for joining us tonight on this special edition of Talking to the Neighborhoods, election 2014, all the results from today's primary election. And at the top here, we want to very quickly update you on the latest numbers that we have. They're pouring in now from across the state, and we do have some numbers we want to bring to you. These courtesy of WCVB-TV, who are sharing their numbers, and you can see this is the race for governor with 13% of the vote in. Martha Coakley holding a slight lead. Again, we're not quite sure where these numbers are coming from, but certainly at this point, she seems to be holding up in the lead. And in some of the other races that we have, the race for Attorney General, Democrats, Maura Healey, former Assistant Attorney General, running in her own right to replace her former boss, Martha Coakley, seems to have a sizable lead over Warren Tolman, former gubernatorial candidate, former lieutenant governor's nominee. And again, this is with 13% in. And the other numbers that we have in the race for state treasurer, this is the Democratic primary as well. Very tight race expected, but if you're looking at these numbers, 12% of the vote in. Deb Goldberg, a former chairman of the Board of Selectmen in Brookline and former candidate as well. This time, she seems to be doing much better. She has a sizable lead. Again, this is with just 12% in. And in the lieutenant governor's race, Steve Kerrigan from Western Mass, Charlton, I believe is his hometown, seems to have a pretty comfortable lead there over Leland Chung, a city councilor from Cambridge, and Mike Lake, an official with the nonprofit groups. And there we have it, the only real race in the Republican primary. As expected, Charlie Baker with a sizable lead over Mark Fisher, a Tea Party Republican, so to speak, and that's with just 9% of the vote in. Again, those are the numbers we have. We'll be updating them as the night goes along, but now I want to welcome, joining me on the set, a couple of my favorite people in the city of Boston. On my far left, she is, of course, a political analyst and operative for several campaigns over the years. And pleased to have joining me Joyce Faribault. Nice to have you here, Joyce.
Thank you, always. Thank you.
From Dig Boston, a up-and-coming Boston magazine, the news editor, former Boston Phoenix writer Chris Ferrone. Chris,
Thanks
nice
a lot.
to have you here.
Always a pleasure.
First of all, Joyce, I've got to mention, and not related to the election, but hearing a lot of comments. Of course, your late husband, Bruce Bowling, who made some history here in the city of Boston in a number of ways. He has not gone forgotten. News that the Ferdinand Building, which will house the Boston School Department, to become the Bruce Bowling Building.
Yes, I'm very happy about that. Thank you to the mayor and to Ayanna Presley, to Tito Jackson, and all the city councilors. I ran into Mike Flaherty. The Flahertys and the Bowlings have always been close for generations, so I'm just very happy. And a tribute to a guy who just has changed the landscape of Boston, and I think young people should know about his history and what he did. He was not a shouter or a yeller, but he just, stuck to the work and made things happen.
First African-American
President of the
Boston
council.
City Council.
That's
I
right.
always remember that day still. I was a young cub reporter at that time, not quite as accomplished as Chris Ferrone, but
I think it's a great capstone because I know that the Ferdinand Building was great in its heyday as a furniture store, but at least since I've been a reporter here, when you talk about the Ferdinand Building, it's been like, what's going on? And now that it's so much positive stuff happening there, it's kind of great to have that, whole new face on it, new name, and I'm excited. Everything looks great.
Thank you.
it's a great
Appreciate
honor.
that.
Well, back
Gorgeous
to the
building.
matter at hand here. Chris, what if they gave an election and no one showed up? What's this about? Michael Flaherty gave us some numbers.
What were
A
they?
little more than 8-10 years ago, 90,000 voters. Today, maybe 60,000 voters in the city of Boston. What is it?
Oh, I think it's funny. There's two ways that everybody's talking about this election, right? This primary. It's a historic election, potentially. May have a great slate of female Democratic candidates for one, and there are other interesting dynamics. And then, of course, everybody's talking about the dismal turnout. Today was a beautiful day out. So when they pull this video out of the time capsule, don't think that it was snowing out or something.
What was your own experience? We were talking offset.
So I went out to, I sat there this morning, I said, instead of just going poll to poll, which, in a city election's exciting, because you're always going to get people, I went out to 21, the notorious low turnout
in Brighton.
at the Jackson Man in Brighton. And what a nice place, and you just hang out in that square and look at nothing happening. I think one
Two
of those,
people came.
one of those giant, from the desert that blow through. So let's see, when I was there about 3 o'clock, and there were 241 votes between 5 precincts, including, let's see, so 12-3 had 23 voters at that time. And everybody was very nice, and there were people
bored.
Yeah, and the city really, it's interesting, the city really did, from what I understand, an even better job than usual, having people speak different languages. I mean, the polls were ready. But I think everybody was at the Apple store waiting for the vote.
Listen, let's face it, this was a boring race, seriously. I really, I didn't make up my mind, honest to God, until I walked into my vote and weighed folks. I think that it just is, I don't know, something missing. This isn't the connection to the folks that it should be. and no one, had anything especially interesting, any issues. It was pretty boring. The only ray of hope that I had that there was a serious fight was really with Steve Grossman coming on in the end, because he's a really nice guy. But he rolled in there very, very strong, and the night's not over. I don't,
Well, and of course, as the numbers seem to indicate as well, there's some significance, and Chris mentioned it. Of course, we could, it's just a primary, of course, but see a number of women elected. And I know that's something you've been near and dear to your heart for many years. Is this a sign of things to come?
Well, actually, I got a call from a reporter asking me that question tonight. And as you know, I've been a longtime member of the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus. Our leader was on the show across the way. And I've never seen this. I think this is the first time in electoral history that I've seen so many women running for the top offices with an opportunity actually to win those top offices. And so the reporter asked me, so then how does the Democratic Party deal with this now? And I said, oh, you mean because they all endorsed Grossman and now they have to endorse the, okay. Listen, it's not just about the gender, and people, I know it's hard, but let's get past the gender. These are very accomplished women. In their own right. And there's not like, we have to sell them, we have to market them. You have to just basically talk about what their contributions have been and what they are to working families. If we get into this dynamic about gender, so women, men, it doesn't serve the public well. People just want to know, what have you done for me lately and what are you going to do for me now?
Well, and Joyce makes a good point. Of course, Steve Grossman got a ton of endorsements. Warren Tolman got even more, it seemed like to me.
He's got his brother, he doesn't need.
What does this say about the changing electorate, Chris?
Well, Ted Goldberg got a lot of endorsements as well.
But
I mean, of course, anybody who's driven up and down 93 knows that those union endorsements, they do a lot. And I think that, come on, let's face it, this is a small election, and when we have something like this, and also, by the way, I want to say, as far as Tolman's numbers, from what I understand, the cities aren't in. And
no,
I've seen the T-shirts, and I've seen a lot of labor guys out there today. So I don't know if that's going on in every city, but let's not count it out. As far as, I just think it's not an exciting election, but I think there are a lot of good candidates. And I think that
boring.
A lot of the ones who, like Maura Healey, are saying really interesting things, happens to be a woman, right? But people are really tired of the, this is so cliche, but they really are tired of the same. And I'm pretty hard progressive. To me, Maura Healey's not that progressive, but to a lot of the electorate, she is, and that's interesting. And she's. I also think a lot of this is boring because people are running on these same issues. We got like healthcare, these things. How about privacy? How about all of these? There's like a million other issues.
Well, that's what I was going to say. What about all those issues? And you covered the Occupy movement. You've
I think
followed electoral politics both on the surface and below the surface. Is this a sign, though, of people just kind of dropping out?
Well, when I was outside a couple of the polls I went to today, you realize it's two worlds. It's like the world of the people holding the signs, and then there are like teenagers who should be knowing about they should know, who don't even know there's an election going on in this school. And I think a lot of that's got to be. I certainly haven't heard a lot about schools. I mean, I know we're a couple blocks away here from a school where the students
Madison Park.
The students pulled the fire alarm this morning. So certainly there's disengagement, but it's understandable. There's two worlds going on here, and the numbers certainly show that today.
Well, let's get to Maura Healey. As a matter of fact, I think she's the most exciting race of everything. Here she starts from nothing. Of course, she was an assistant AG. But she came on like gangbusters. Her campaign was flawless against a guy whose brother is the head of the AFL-CIO. I do think she's going to win. I think that, she's one of those people that just hit the rhythm. You know what I mean? She hit the rhythm, and a lot of people were, with her. So I think that she'll win this race.
Let's not count out the combination of someone. I really think, I know people make fun of the LG's race. Steve Kerrigan is somebody who really is
I
a
love
Democratic insider. He knows everybody. Look at the numbers. He's killing it across the state. But also, I happen to, some of his positions, he has some great progressive values. And this is like across the board, really good candidate. And so far the numbers are showing it. And that is, that's good to see, because I really do like Steve Kerrigan.
Of course, does any of it matter? Michael Flaherty was here earlier, and he said, he's talking to people. They were coming out of the polls. They go, well, I'm voting in the Democratic primary because, of course, yes, that's most of the people in the city are Democrats or vote Democratic, but may not be so in the fall.
You're very right. So many people.
Do you see that undercurrent there?
Absolutely. I mean, for example, I have to, say Charlie Baker, he comes from an administration, frankly, that has that has more diversity than anyone, than any governor, okay? My husband's organization, Mass Alliance, wouldn't be here without Charlie Baker. And many of my friends are doing fundraisers for him all over the place of color and throughout the state. So he's also hitting a stride that he didn't, hit before. So there are a couple of people who are tapping in. And then there are other folks who, folks are saying, geez, last time they didn't do so well and I didn't like them then, I'm, not going to do it this time. So it's just a funny time. I can't put a pulse on why it's that way.
Chris, how could this be in the age of Obama?
Yeah.
We just broke several thresholds here.
Yeah.
And,
I heard some, well, I don't think you got the Republicans, the Democrats. I've already heard friends of mine who I won't call out by name, pundits today, like ruling out all the independents. And I think that Jeff McCormick, he lost everybody, so it's going to be Evan Falchuk. Don't underestimate him. I don't think he's going to win.
Trying to build a new independent
This is
party.
an interesting guy. He's fluent in
interesting.
Spanish, which I learned recently.
He's a great guy.
And people really like him. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of young people making $85,000 a year and up in the Innovation District and such who really like Falchuk. If you listen to a lot of radio, he has a lot of ads. He's not invisible. So I think that'll be something interesting to watch.
Does he cut in this race? Or
I don't think
debates?
so.
I think the debates will be not a bellwether. And I don't know where he would cut in. I'm not that kind of soothsayer, but I think it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah.
No Green Party candidate this year?
Oh, no.
Not unless I run, Joe.
Go, Chris.
Well, now that could be an interesting race, especially the debates. Again, Joyce Faribault, Chris Ferrone. There's a couple of local races on the ballot. Gloria Fox being challenged by two bright young men in that race. Some people say, is she primed for an upset, Joyce?
Well, not with a low turnout and two guys running, splitting the vote. I mean, I don't see it. I mean, anything can happen. I mean, look what happened with Martha and Scott. But I don't think so. I think that she holds her seat. The two guys needed to put it around one. If they had done that, I think,
Of course, the other race, I'm not sure anybody cares, but of course, there's Dan Cullinane, who's running for re-election, just won a special. Dan Ryan in Charlestown running, just won a special. I think most people see them as safe, but what about the county races? Very quickly, should we even care who's the register probate?
Arroyo. You think Arroyo will do it?
I mean, who knows? But the name recognition.
The name recognition.
A Kennedy did win a governor's council seat a couple of years ago, which
on the name, and he wasn't a Kennedy family member.
It's like the Eddie Murphy movie.
Anything
the Distinguished
is
Gentleman.
possible. And Steve Tompkins should sail in.
More significantly,
He should
Steve
sail
Tompkins. Some people thought he might be vulnerable. Of course,
with four people running against him?
There's a lot of those. Up Carl Scortino's seat, I think the 34th Middlesex is
That's
like
right.
a four-way primary.
Women.
No, there's one guy's name's Craig Rourke in there.
Okay.
But it's there's some interesting races. When I see who wins them, I'll go back and I'll trace the money. That's what'll be fun. Because there's a couple who I've seen got a few shots. I don't want to call anybody out right now.
You're the guy I know that can track it down. Again, Chris Ferrone from
Thank you so much.
Boston Dig. Thanks for joining us, and of course Joyce Faribault bowling. Nice to have you back as always. We'll toss now back to my colleague Seth McCoy with a couple of other guests and some quick updates on the latest numbers. Seth, back to you.
Thanks, Joe. Joining me now, Jim Spencer from the Campaign Network and Kevin Peterson from New Democracy Coalition. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
It's election night in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Jim, how does it make you feel?
Well, it's a little bit more exciting night than any of us expected, I think, right now. With the numbers closing between Grossman and Martha Coakley, it looks like there might be an upset in the Tierney-Moulton race, and some other interesting. It looks like Healy's running away with it.
I know, it does look like she's running away with it. Kevin, are you surprised that Maura Healey is doing so well?
I am, and I'm equally surprised at the low level of voter turnout.
That's something we've been talking about all night long, is how low the turnout has been and how we can really get people to the polls in November. What do you think will happen in November based on what's happening today?
Well, I think depending on who the finalists are, there's going to be a real concerted effort for the campaigns to really invest in a ground game, invest in door knocking, invest in touching voters as much as they can. If they do that, I think that those candidates will be successful.
Jim, do you think, let's say it's Martha Coakley versus Charlie Baker, do you think that she has a shot at winning?
Oh yeah, I think that you're going to see a new dynamic in this final election, whether it's Martha or Grossman, and I think it's going to be Martha Coakley. And I think that's going to be about Karen Polito, who you haven't heard much about right now.
Right.
But Karen Polito is a very, very conservative person. I mean, Charlie Baker has gone from having a running mate that was Richard Desai, who was much more liberal than Karen Polito. And you're going to be hearing new things about Karen Polito. I mean, she's practically a Tea Partier.
Right.
And I think that could be a real drag on the ticket for Charlie Baker.
You think that will scare people off?
I think it could.
Yeah, and you mentioned a good point. Charlie Baker is very moderate. People tend to like him, but coupled with somebody like Karen Polito, that could drag him down.
Well, I think the other thing is, think about the ad that was done against Seth Moulton by Tierney, and doing that ad against Charlie Baker when the Republican money starts coming in. It's still a very Democratic state, and it's going to be a real battle.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be a real battle anyway.
But I think Charlie Baker will take a different strategy this year than he did 4 years ago, just in terms of targeting inner cities, urban communities, particularly gateway cities, and even communities of color. That's going to make the race a little more interesting, because I think there's some potential traction between Charlie Baker and urban voters.
And he has been spending a lot of time here in the city of Boston working those communities.
That's right. He's personally been out to a number of churches, black churches, which is a traditional base among minority voters, particularly in Boston. So it's going to be interesting to see what strategy he employs in urban communities to counterbalance the Polito effect, which may drag in some parts of the state.
Let's talk about Steve Kerrigan. It looks like he's going to be the nominee for the lieutenant governor's position. What do we think about him? Is he help, or does he hurt whoever the governor?
Well, assuming that Healy, without talking about Healy, he's going to be the first, statewide candidate that's gay, on a ticket. I think he's, well qualified for the position, and he's a Kennedy guy. So for a guy like me, that's a good thing.
Yes, indeed. You have a long history.
And he's run just an excellent campaign strategically. Going into the race, I thought Mike Lake would be more of a formidable challenger, but Lake seems to have faded, and Kerrigan has just sort of walked away with this.
And Leland Chung never really had any traction, which was a little surprising, and that may be because Mike Lake and Leland pull from that same base, essentially. Is that what you feel as well, Jim?
I think so, and I think that there's some other things about Leland. I don't even know that he's all that popular, in Cambridge, and I think that he didn't have a real good strategy. He wasn't real well financed, and I don't think it was ever there for him.
Right. I feel like Steve Kerrigan, just getting back to him for a second, he was everywhere. There were times that I would turn around and he would just be, walking upstairs or downstairs or standing next to me, and I was shocked at how often I saw him during this race.
Yeah, there was a very aggressive campaigner. The other thing that we shouldn't discount is that Kerrigan is a good old Irish name. Lake is not, and Leland is not. And I think that subconsciously has an effect on traditional voters. Right. It's a nice, solid named it.
Next.
Well, with a race that probably got less attention than any other race.
Right.
I mean, many times
Well-
the Attorney General doesn't get less attention, but the Lieutenant Governor's race, they just had nothing.
Right, exactly. And a lot of people talk about that office and say, do we really need a lieutenant
Right.
governor? Since Tim Murray stepped aside, has the void needed to be filled? Kevin, what do you think?
Well, the fact that our lieutenant governor, I'm spacing on his name. I mean, but it's almost like an
Tim Murray.
Tim Murray. It's
Yeah.
almost like an appendage. Do you really need it,
Right.
right? I'm not sure how much clout the office holds anymore. It's always been in some way ceremonial. But unless we change the Constitution, we're still going to have that.
It's a constitutional question. We all
Right.
talk about it, but it's not going to change.
Right, exactly. Pretty harsh editorial, though, from the Globe in that office. So I'm sure Leland woke up that morning saying yes, and then towards the end he said, ah. But anyway, let's talk about the treasurer's race. Deb Goldberg looks like she's going to run away with it. How do you think she ran her campaign compared to Barry Feingold or Tom Conroy?
Well, I think that, Conroy got the endorsements, but he didn't have the money to really, put together an operation.
Right.
Barry Feingold seemed to be doing very well early, but I think that Deb Goldberg honestly benefited from women voters.
Yep.
I mean, there was a lot of, it's what is it, 54% of the electorate is female already.
Right.
You had, strong women on the ticket, and because, again, this is a race that didn't get a lot of attention, if you're a woman going to vote and you hadn't even looked down at the treasurer's race, you say, well, you have two guys and you have a woman, and I think that, that can provide a margin, but I mean, she's winning by a sizable amount.
Right, and most women, let's be honest, run the finances at home. So
That's
if they're
right.
going
Right.
to the polls, they're saying, I'm going to go with a woman. We do have some results for that race. Tom Conroy at 27%, Barry Feingold at 28%, and Deb at 45%. That's a pretty big margin. So good for her. We were just talking to Samantha Washburn-Baronie and Representative Michaelwitz about whether or not this is the year of the woman. Kevin, do you think that this is? I mean, we may have Martha Coakley running for governor, Deb Goldberg for treasurer, Maura Healey for attorney general, and Suzanne Bump running for re-election.
Yeah, we may become New Hampshire South, right? where women will rule, and that's a good thing. That's a good progressive thing. Time will, time in this election will tell. But I think the three women who appear to be headed to success tonight are women of substance. They run very strong campaigns with very strong messages, and they're poised to be victorious.
That's an important distinction to make as well, is that the women who are on the ballot have great records. They're strong. They have set out their
Highly
goals.
credentialed, right.
Absolutely. Let's talk for a minute about endorsements, not union endorsements, but here in the city of Boston, a lot of people came out for Warren Tolman. It looks like Maura Healey is going to run away with this office or this election. Do endorsements from elected officials here in Boston matter anymore, Jim?
Well, I've always said, I've always challenged people, is name me one election that was ever won by an endorsement or even endorsements.
Right.
It's just not, it's important, you want that support. I mean, you could get that support and it's something that you desire, but it just doesn't win or lose elections. The Boston Globe is not having a great record, even on the people that they've been choosing, recently either. So I'm not sure, I mean, everybody wants an endorsement. I'm not sure that Governor Patrick would have come out the box for Warren Tolman had it not been that Healey was really going up in the polls, and
Right.
he felt like he really owed it to Tolman. It was very clear. I mean, it's not certainly a surprise that that the mayor, being the labor guy that he is, was going to be for Warren Tolman, and I don't think that this is a big a statement on machinery of the new mayor, because I think it was kind of it was not. It was not something he put out there that it had to be.
Right, absolutely. We have some numbers up for this race. Maura Healey at 63%, Warren Tolman at 37%. This is only with 28% of the vote in. Kevin, do you think we'll see any major change in that?
I don't think so. I think that that's pretty much indicative of where that race is going to be, and it's a surprise to me. I thought it was going to be much closer.
Right.
I actually thought that the mayor's endorsement would have had more clout in terms of boots on the ground and putting a field team, particularly across Boston. But apparently, as I moved around on polls this afternoon, I didn't see a strong Marty Walsh effect.
What were you hearing in the communities of color in terms of whether or not, people were going with Moore or with Warren?
There's been very little sort of resonance among communities of color in Boston and across the state during this race so far. It may be because there hasn't been any specific outreach with a specific message around urban issues, and that may develop over the next 6 to 8 weeks. But there wasn't much of a buzz, and as I was looking at the Boston numbers from the minority wards and precincts, they were fairly low, and I think that reflects a lack of engagement in some ways in this
Right,
race.
absolutely. How do we get those people more engaged?
Well, you got to reach out to them. You got to appeal to their issues. A major issue is one around public safety, and there hasn't been much talk among any of the candidates so far around the issue of violence in Springfield, for example, or even Boston. And then there's the issue around education, charter schools versus the traditional public schools, and whether there should be more competition. So I think that the wiser candidates who are interested in winning what I think will be close races, although they would have to sort of reach out to urban voters and specifically engage them around issues that are germane to their communities.
I think the other thing that's really important is that, the campaigns, particularly statewide campaigns, spend millions of dollars. And they need to spend a certain amount of money for boots in the ground in communities.
Right.
And because people in communities know how to turn out people in their community. And so if they looked at that with the same kind of authority that they look at a TV advertisement or an online ad or something else, and that changes the dynamic. And this year, maybe more so than ever before, because for Democrats to win, to have a Democratic governor and Democratic constitutional offices, we have to win in the cities, and we have to win big in the cities.
Right.
And Charlie Baker's going to be a formidable foe.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that this is the first time, I think, in 8 years where there hasn't been a person of color running statewide.
Right. It's a little.
So the numbers within communities of color across the state have gone up, but they may have gone up artificially because they were inspired by first-time governor, black governor, first-time black president. I'm concerned that if there isn't significant investment in terms of focusing on the issues and putting resources in those communities, that communities of color may stay home.
Well, and the other side of that argument is that we should hope that they actually come out and vote, because then they can show their strength and show that the issues that they're bringing to the table are very important and they need to be addressed. We have some numbers for the register of probate position, which of course had significant candidates coming in. Patricia Campitelli, who is the incumbent, 13% of the vote, not a big surprise there. We can chat about her in a minute. Felix Arroyo looks like he is the next register of probate, perhaps, with 50% of the vote. Richard Joyce with 11%, David Keenan with 5%, Martin Keogh with 16%, and John Sepulveda with 3%. Surprised about that?
Well, with 58% of the vote in, Felix Arroyo is definitely, I guarantee, nobody's going to catch him there.
Probably not.
Well, Felix clearly, he's done a lot for the city. He was on the school committee. He was on, city council for years. His son, with the same name, is a popular city councilor who just ran for mayor. And, so there's a name identification. It's a known person. So for once in this register of probate, race, you actually knew the person and you could identify the person. You knew who they were. And you say, well, I trust that guy.
Well, and you know what? I have to say, for all of her follies, Patricia really brought attention to that office because of what she did. Many people would not know what the Register of Probate did, except for the fact that she, sort of made a mess out of her position there. So we also have the sheriff's race. So we'll take a look at those numbers right now. Sheriff Steve Tompkins, 62% of the vote. Doug Bennett, 25%. Jeremiah Goodwin with 0.5. This is with 58% reporting. Probably not any big surprises there, Kevin.
No, Tompkins, I think, was he was the appointed candidate and he was also the anointed candidate. He got endorsements from the establishment across the board. He also possesses a very strong message around the role of the sheriff, and it's not about locking them up and locking them down, but looking at the issue of rehabilitation.
And that is a very important message, and one that he obviously got delivered to
He
all the
delivered it
voters.
very clearly. People sort of understood that some of these inmates need psychological care, some of them need drug care, some of them need reentry help in terms of finding a job.
Yeah.
A very cleanly delivered message, and I think that sort of shows in the results.
I think the other thing about Sheriff Tompkins as a politician and as a candidate, because he's really a first-time candidate,
Right.
because he was appointed to this position.
Yeah.
He ran this race every day like he was 100 points behind.
Yep.
I mean, and he ran hard, and he worked hard, and he was everywhere, and he had an organization, and he put it together. And I think you may be seeing some real things from him in the future beyond sheriff.
Right. There were some criticisms that he wasn't in law enforcement, so maybe he shouldn't be sheriff. Do you agree with that, real quickly?
Well, that's not what the numbers say.
That is true. And as Kevin said, he's doing a great job. So, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight, taking
Wonderful.
some time out of your busy schedules to be here. And Joe, I'm going to throw it back to you.
All right, Seth, thank you very much. Again, tonight, as we count down the numbers from across the state and also some local races that we're following, some very interesting results. Just very quickly at the top, we want to recount where we are at this point in time. These are some statewide numbers coming to us through courtesy of WCVB-TV in Boston, and this is, you can see, with 46% of the vote in. Martha Coakley still maintaining a narrow lead. Steve Grossman, 5 points back, and Don Berwick, third candidate, doing very well, surprisingly well, 21%. Yet Coakley, who was the early favorite, continues to hold that lead. And in the race for Attorney General, perhaps somewhat of a surprise, Warren Tolman, a former gubernatorial candidate, former lieutenant governor nominee, making his return to politics. Many people thought he was the clear favorite in this race, yet with 45% of the vote, he's trailing nearly 2-1 to Maura Healey, former assistant attorney general, in the treasurer's race. And this is tightening up a bit from our earlier numbers. Again, this is with 45% of the vote. Deb Goldberg, a former candidate for treasurer, making a second statewide run, and she's, of course, a former chairman of the Board of Selectmen in Brookline. And with some catchy television ads, perhaps that's the difference in this race, holding on to a substantial lead over Barry Feingold, state senator from the North Shore, or Essex County, I should say, and Representative Tom Conroy from Wayland. And numbers for the lieutenant governor's race. These were all candidates that no one knew much about. Steve Kerrigan from Western Mass, a Democratic National Committee official, seems to continue to hold a substantial lead here at this point, again with 46%. He's got 50% of the vote. Leland Chung, a Cambridge City Councilor, second at 30%, and Mike Lake, a nonprofit official and former Clinton administration official, with 20%. And in the Republican governor's race, no surprise here, this is with 44% reporting. Charlie Baker, the former boy wonder of the Weld administration, making his second run for governor, an easy, large lead, I should say, over Mark Fisher, a Tea Party Republican. Now, we have some local races, and I very quickly want to run through these. We have no numbers from the Governor's Council race, but in the race for Suffolk County Register of Probate, and you can see a familiar name there. He's a former Boston City Councilor, the first Latino ever elected there, seems to have a sizable lead, certainly 51%. Felix D. Arroyo, and of course, perhaps some of that is owing to name recognition. Martin Keogh, an attorney from West Roxbury, second. And in the Suffolk County Sheriff's race. Sheriff Steve Tompkins, who's just so happens to also be a host here on BNN. I'm not sure we can attribute those numbers to that, but he certainly is got a very comfortable lead in the race against Doug Bennett, a former candidate for City Council, and Jeremiah Goodwin, who's a police officer from Revere. And State Senate, no surprise here, Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, an easy winner there over Roy Owens, a perennial candidate. And we'll go to the House races. Representative Evandro Carvalho, who won a special election, well on his way to a re-election victory in this election with over 50% of the vote against perennial candidate Althea Garrison. And we go to the 12th Suffolk, Representative Dan Cullinane, who won also a special election. That's the seat formerly held by Senator Linda Dorsina Forey, and he's well on his way to re-election. And if we can go to now the 14th Suffolk, Representative Angela Scotia, the Dean of the House, the longest serving member of the State House of Representatives, appears to be on his way to re-election, although that's with only 5.9% of the votes, running against Anthony Salamini. Not much in the way of local races. We're kind of waiting for some numbers from the 7th Suffolk House race, Representative Gloria Fox running for re-election there. Pleased to have joining me in this final segment a couple of old friends, and from Commonwealth Magazine, its executive editor, Michael Jonas joins us. Michael, nice to have you here as always, my friend. And former Boston City Councilor John Tobin, who still keeps his toe in the political pool. At least
for you, Joe. Otherwise, I'd be irrelevant.
Nice to have you here, guys. Well, where shall we start? Again, not complete results, but the governor's race appears to be the Democratic primary, a little closer than some people might have thought. Steve Grossman made a late run there. I guess we won't know for perhaps another hour or so. But any surprises there that you saw?
Not really. I mean, I thought the low turnout. I voted at the Joyce Gilmer School at 7:15 tonight, and it hadn't even cracked 500, which is
that's a Ward 20 on top of it. The highest.
16 is one of the highest voting precincts within Ward 20, and I mean, City of Boston races, there are easily 900, 1,000, 1,100 votes coming out of there. So for state primary, so I thought that might benefit Grossman a little bit. These things always in a 3-person Democratic primary, low turnout. You're not going to see a 20-point margin typically. These things always tend to tighten over.
Well, the polls seem to indicate that, but
it would seem to be Martha's there for the nomination.
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, I mean the polls really did show a much bigger margin, and so you can only guess that the pollsters were grabbing at a bigger pool of voters than we actually saw turn out today. They were trying, they use all sorts of screens to try to get at who's a likely voter. And I think the best guess you can make is that they were a little off in that, and they knew from asking about sort of intensity of support that Grossman's people, had a little more fervor, so they were the hardcore voters that you were going to be more likely to see in a lower turnout, and that's what happened. There was also just a clear sense that Grossman was kind of really catching a tailwind the last couple of weeks. There was a lot more energy in his campaign in general.
I love that picture in the Globe with him riding the go-kart.
Yeah, even
I think he got more votes with that than, who knows.
Well, I wondered if that was almost like going to be like Dukakis in the tank, but it didn't work against him. It seemed to kind of humanize him. It made him a little, he's a pretty serious guy, and it showed another side of him.
He's a serious guy, but but in a way, he's had more ice cream than Ben and Jerry's
Maybe that's
across the state, and but he's really, remember this guy is no newcomer. I mean, this is a guy who's raised millions of dollars for the National Democratic Party, has a lot of contacts, a lot of friends. Basically went out there, and I thought his ace in the hole at the beginning was that he had just mined. He knew everybody from selectmen to city councils to fence viewers out in Western Mass. I mean, he knew every elected official.
It was
appointed
amazing.
official,
It's amazing.
and
Yeah.
was there for all their functions, and who knows how many miles he put. I think he probably had to resort to the go-kart because his car probably ran out of tread from going around the state. He really worked hard and really mined that local level. And just
hey, Warren Tolman knew everybody too. I mean, look at his array of endorsements. Yes, the labor is one thing, but I mean, he garnered an incredible number of endorsements. I can't remember, 9 out of 13 Boston city councilors. But not that says so much in and of itself, but it's not insignificant. Seemed to have great numbers here, great support here in the city of Boston. Yet, if you look at those numbers coming in, and of course that's with 45% of the vote, but Maura Healey, winning perhaps by as much as 2-1.
Yeah, I think more and more as each election goes by, I think the list, when people run the scroll of endorsements, and I've been guilty of the city council, I think it means less and less to people.
I agree with John.
It means less and less. It's just a waste of ad time and a waste of space in your campaign literature. I think people just want to have you look them face to face in the eye and tell you why they're the best candidate. And I think if today's numbers stand the way they look like they're going, it's really it's the year of the woman. In your constitutional offices, Martha being the nominee for governor, you'll have Maura Healey, the nominee for AG. Suzanne Bump's already there as auditor, and it looks like Deb Goldberg is going to prevail as the D for treasurer.
How will that set up the Democrats in the general election? Does that give them a gender sweep? Not that that would be an oversimplification, certainly, but. Of course, traditionally, or at least in recent history, Democrats have done very well amongst women. And does this signal something greater there?
I mean, I think it's going to go down as a remarkable moment in state history if these results prevail, because we have been in this odd situation where we're known sort of nationally as this progressive liberal state, yet it has frankly been very difficult for women to crack the sort of upper echelons of statewide office, U.S. Senate seats. We've had only a couple of women in House seats. We now have one with Nikki, well, 2 with Nikki Tsongas and Catherine Clark, but it's been pretty dry going until now. So I think that's going to be remarkable. I don't know that having all those women on the ticket in and of itself is going to change the dynamic of the fall race. I mean, I think the attention is still going to focus on the governor's race. Frankly, I think some of the other races are not likely to be super competitive, between the Democrats and Republicans. But there is going to be an issue, in the governor's race that, will presumably work somewhat to Martha Coakley's benefit. I think the polls showed it worked to her benefit in this primary race. I mean, she was winning by pretty big margins among women voters, and just as you saw some of the men in these races do that, I think you're going to see. I mean, Baker's going to go hard, for the women's vote.
Absolutely.
And have surrogates.
Well, I was
He's picked a woman as going to be his running mate.
This is a kinder, gentler Charlie Baker. Does that? How does that flesh out in a general view?
Well, I think Charlie. I mean, obviously, I think the woman issue is that there's going to be a big benefit with the electorate. Seems to be it's overwhelmingly females, so that will, I think, give a little bit of benefit to Martha in the final. And there's a down ballot, kind of a draft thing, a benefit that a lot of the other candidates seem to have. I think Charlie Baker learned a lot of lessons from 4 years ago. You say he's a kinder, gentler. I think he's always been kinder and gentler, but it's just how he's been perceived on television, and he's just softened up. But I think he learned some lessons. Having a female as his running mate is going to be a big help. But expect to see. This is not a knock, so we have to expect to see a lot of Mrs. Baker, and I think Charlie has at least one daughter, and maybe more than other females.
He'll find some others if he has. Suddenly he'll have 3 or 4.
Females that he worked with in the Walter-Salucci administrations, and so it's going to be. It's going to be telling. This is the female or male. It's always been tough, that glass ceiling for law enforcement, particularly AGs, to move up. The list is long of people who couldn't do it. Bellotti and Hochberger, and I think there's more than
Tom Riley.
Tom Riley, yeah. So it's a long list. When you're in law enforcement, you're not the most popular person on earth,
Well, we'll see how that plays out. Again, the numbers are not all in. The Democratic primary still perhaps too close to call, at least at this point. But guys, looking forward to the fall campaign. We, of course, had a representative of the Republican Party here earlier tonight, and she was saying, well, when the gas tax repeal gets on the ballot, and what about some of these other ballot issues? Of course, the casino repeal effort have an effect on these races up ballot, the governor's race?
You can never predict. I mean, anything could, as they say, anything can happen in the next 6 weeks. You just know an issue that just pops up, whether it's a past issue, a personal issue, or a political issue, a vote that was taken, something that emerges that's just unforeseen and just unpredictable. But if it's, on the merits of legislation, I think it's really, at this point, it's two personalities face to face, between Martha and Charlie. A lot of those debates are going to be very, very interesting, I think. Two seasoned people at it. Remember, Charlie was, he was a selectman in Swampscott. Martha's been through the local thing too, even though she was unsuccessful. Ran for rep in Dorchester many years ago. Lost to Mayor Walsh, actually, and so it's going to be two seasoned veterans who I think will have learned a lot of lessons, respectively, in prior elections, prior defeats.
What about that, Michael? You've watched her, followed her campaigning. She, of course, during the race against Scott Brown in the special election, very short porch, and it fell apart very quickly, but not until very near the end. Are those lessons that won't be lost, especially after Liz Warren, the model that she kind of rolled out? Democrats learned something from that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that she has absolutely learned lessons from it, and if she hasn't, she continues to learn them because, I mean, she cannot escape the questions about that. I think it's probably all she can do to sort of contain herself and not just explode. I mean, she's been asked a million times
She
now.
knows every Red Sox player's name.
About
she
that.
knows every.
She knew the backup quarterback of the Patriots. I've got to tell you, I did not know the answer to that. I have not been following it that closely. But, I mean, I think there's two things. I think our campaign knows it. I think they're going to not take anything for granted. They're going to go all out, use all the cliches. I mean, the thing that's harder to change is, these candidates kind of are who they are. I mean, she is naturally a somewhat more reserved person. She has spent a lifetime in a prosecutor's office in positions that, demand kind of more precision and care and nuance in what you say, and not a lot of kind of bombast and
that may serve her well in the general versus primary, which tend to be a little more emotional.
I mean, the only other thing I would say that people should just sort of fasten their seatbelts for is the spending that we're going to see in this race, not just from the two candidates, but from outside super PACs.
Yeah. We saw some of that in the primary, but
we saw a little bit,
and
really the first time we've seen it in any to any degree in Massachusetts in the sort of post-Citizens United era was in the mayor's race here, and I think that completely blew people away. Nobody was prepared for the millions of dollars that were poured into that race, and you're going to see that times some number.
National Republicans get behind Charlie Baker in this.
There's going to be national money coming in. There's already a super PAC that's been set up by Democratic aligned organizations that's going to be spending heavily, and it's going to be nasty because the nature of the outside spending is while the candidates themselves try to promote a positive message about their candidacy, they leave it to the other groups to go on the attack against the other candidate, and so we're going to see a lot of that, I think.
Both candidates are going to depend heavily on those PACs and super PACs because
which they know nothing about.
They know nothing about.
They don't coordinate with.
I know nothing. So, particularly because individual contributions continue to go down because there's just been this avalanche of special elections that have occurred over the past several years, and people are tapped out. It's just an election after all. It seems like every 6 months is an election and someone asking you for a donation to something. So I think that's why there's going to be even more of a reliance on these super PACs.
Well, guys, as always, I enjoyed having you here. Again, we're running out of time here as we go off the air tonight. We'll show the results that we have, but of course, tune into your local news and tomorrow's papers. I want to thank my guests once again, Michael Jonas, John Tobin. Thank you both for coming in.
Thanks,
as
Joe.
always,
Always a
I
pleasure.
enjoy it. And of course, want to thank my host, my co-host, I should say, Seth McCoy, did a great job tonight. All of our guests, and especially the staff and crew here at BNN. A lot of work goes on behind the scenes. This is the easy part. My thanks to all of them as well. You're watching this special edition of Talking the Neighborhoods. We'll be back next week at our regular time with one of the independent candidates. So that's Monday at 8. Until then, for everyone here at BNN, thanks for watching the election 2014. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.